After 9/11, our elites asked one question over and over again. Now they have that chance again to ask that same question. They're never going to do it.
And the question is, why do they hate us?
If you look at newspaper clippings from after 9/11, Newsweek, for example, why do they hate us? Explaining why they hate us on the 10th anniversary of 9/11. Again, after 9/11, why do they hate us? The Huffington Post. And again, these organizations asked a question. They came up with very, very similar answers. And those answers had to do with the moral lapses of the American people and the moral lapses of the government that we, the people, elected to represent us. For example, the San Francisco Gate volunteered the opinions of black Americans as to why the terrorists hate us. The hypocrisy of it all is not lost on black folks. In the wake of September 11th, when the shocked nation was asking the question, why do they hate us? Few saw our hands waving eagerly to offer a litany of answers. Arrogance, dominance, exploitation, oppression, racism, militarism, imperialism. Shall I go on?
They're trying to get into the minds of the hijackers, trying to understand what they're saying, where they're going, how they're doing, so on and so forth. But that's not really where they're going. That's not really what it is. It's saying that you people are to blame. We the people are to blame. We're the ones who are at fault, not the intellectuals, not the hijackers. If you just listened to us, this wouldn't have been an issue.
A lot of the things that we're being blamed for in these articles are American foreign policy that had to do with America's response to the Cold War. Of course, the Cold War would have been a whole lot different if America's elite had handled the end of World War II differently. But we're still, when the elites are asking these questions, why do they hate us? They always still seem to want to shake their fingers at us. You shouldn't have voted that way. You shouldn't be arrogant. You shouldn't be racist, assuming that Americans are. No, see, all your failings. That's why the terrorists who threw their airplanes into these buildings hated us.
But where's the common man in this whole situation? Where's the common sense? Where's the guys who said, you want to blame me, but we're following your policies. Like, you told us this is how we're supposed to act. We believed you, so that's the way we did what we did. Now you've proven to us that you're not to be believed, and then you wonder why we don't trust you.
Another thing that we were blamed for as a reason for 9/11, as long as this nation's 5% of the population consumes 25% of the world's oil, there will be those who resent us and some who hate us. Now, I'm not sure that the amount of oil that was being consumed by America factored into the thinking of people who decided to ram planes into buildings. But I'm kind of skeptical that they were really thinking about that as they were navigating towards those buildings. Speaking of universities, the most famous university professor in America is Noam Chomsky. He's reputedly the smartest smarty pants ever to pull on a pair of slacks. And he opined in a book that it's silly for Americans to ask, why do they hate us, when the U.S. scorns international institutions that dare question its hegemony. Internationalism became the way of thinking among intellectuals after World War II. The UN was started, all these other organizations, the WHO, the WEF, all this stuff. Now that we, the people, want to vote the way we see fit and control American affairs by Americans, people like Noam Chomsky are saying that's why they hate us. They hate us because we're not doing things his way.
All right, so I just want to answer Noam Chomsky here. You're telling me he's the smartest pants, I don't know, however you put it, the smartest of the smarty pants. Okay, great. He's the smartest of the smarty pants. So when 9/11 happened, I'm in the state of Israel, in the city of Jerusalem. And, my friend David Olesker had a great story that happened to him. When the towers went down, he's in a cab. The cab driver immediately knew that it was Osama bin Laden. He immediately knew why it had happened. And there were thousands of people who had the exact same story. We all knew it. It wasn't a question to us. These intellectuals with the higher lofty ideals and thoughts and this, that, and everything else missed out what everybody with common sense saw. We all saw the exact same thing, and we all knew it to be true. You took a guy who's fighting fighting a war. We were on one side, they were on, the other team was on the other side. So what did we do? We took a local, we taught him how to kill, we taught him what to do, we taught him how to bomb, this and everything else, and then we're surprised that he turned it on us when we abandoned him. Like, are we shocked? And the fact that they can't even see that blows my mind.
Misinformation and disinformation. That is considered one of the biggest global risks in the entire world. Here, look. The World Economic Forum, Global Risks 2024. Disinformation tops global risks as environmental threats intensify. If disinformation is such an important threat, I wonder why they're not asking the question, why don't they believe us? I'm not really comfortable with the term misinformation and disinformation. I'm more comfortable with the term alternative information, because in order for it to be misinformation or disinformation, you have to prove it false. And until it's proven false, a more neutral term like alternative information is just better. And the reason I say that is because there are so many times that the official narrative, the media, advance these hoaxes on the American people. For example, during the beginning of the Biden presidential campaign, Joe Biden said, his very first line of his campaign, he said that he started his campaign because Donald Trump called white supremacists very fine people.
And that's when we heard the words of the President of the United States that stunned the world and shocked the conscience of this nation. He said there were, quote, some very fine people on both sides. Very fine people on both sides? With those words, the President of the United States assigned a moral equivalence between those spreading hate and those with the courage to stand against it.
And all it takes to know that that is a lie is to look at about 5 minutes of videotape. He told a lie that can be easily disproven, and he told it anyway. He never bothered to ask, why don't people believe me anymore after he told a lie like that? And just recently, for example, he told another lie about former President Trump when he said that President Trump, when he went to Europe, refused to visit the graves of American servicemen from World War I and called the people who died in that war idiots and losers.
Think about this, especially here in South Carolina, a proud military state. Donald Trump, when he was commander-in-chief, refused to visit a cemetery, U.S. cemetery outside of Paris for fallen American soldiers. And he referred to those heroes, and I quote, as suckers and losers. He actually said that.
Again, it only takes a few minutes to debunk that, but he said it anyway. And he never bothers to ask himself, why don't people believe me? Why do people think I'm a liar?
So let me see if I got this right. He's asking the question, why don't you trust me? It's because you're a liar. You've proven to be a liar over and over and over again. As you said, just a couple of minutes of research and I can prove your points being false. Not a question. We look at what's going on. We look at, like the vaccines, whether you believe they were legitimate or not. It divided families because there was so much distrust in what was being said that nobody knew what was what, and you had to either believe or not believe. And if you didn't believe it, you didn't take it. And now, what are we seeing with the vaccines? You see how many people are just like, they wish they never did.
Well, here's what our elites told us COVID was going to be like if you get it. That seems pretty bad.
Yeah, that was pretty bad. I mean, that scared the crap out of me. I had COVID twice, and the first time I got it, I also struggled breathing. And it wasn't as bad as that girl, but it was pretty bad. I mean, I lost friends to COVID. I saw the heartbreak and the horrors that came with it.
After George Floyd died, the CDC commented on the riots that followed. And what they said was that racism is the real pandemic. And all of a sudden, people were gathering in large crowds without masks. And instead of the CDC sending in riot brigades to break up these gatherings, they said, no, racism is the real pandemic. And doctors' organizations made very similar comments as well. I'm in a white coat, and I believe that racism is a virus. That kind of comment from many, many doctors. But if you're going to die terribly, like in that video we just saw, maybe the protests against how the police conduct their business can wait for a bit. And after all the publicity for this, people began to think that thousands of unarmed black people were being killed by the police each year, when that number is in the lower half of the double digits. So there were two kinds of misinformation. One, that racism threatens more people than the COVID pandemic. And two, that the number of people actually being killed is a lot higher than it really is. And that piece of misinformation caused Americans to get angrier than they needed to be.
To make racism on the same level as a worldwide pandemic blows my mind on how stupid that is. We're all nervous about our lives here, and then we're worrying about something, which is a very important issue. I will not talk that. I will not say that. But when you look at, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the first need is to make sure you're alive. Everything else is past that. That's what we were doing. And then you can't put anything on that level unless it's on that level. And then they sent us both messages, and they both can't be true at the same time.
That brings us to the recent video that's been circulating. So Mollie Hemmingway, who wrote the book Rigged, recently testified in front of Congress, and this is what she had to say.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to testify today. The American system of self-governance is under attack. Instead of an election day where everyone votes at the same time and with the same full set of information, votes are counted quickly, and everyone promptly knows and trusts the outcome, we now have lengthy election seasons that can last months prior to and even after Election Day. The situation is so absurd that we have presidential and gubernatorial debates weeks after some people have already voted. Instead of having total security and a verifiable chain of custody for ballots being issued, cast, and counted, we flood addresses across the country with tens of millions of unsupervised mail-in ballots months ahead of elections, frequently to locations from which voters, if they're even alive, have long since moved.
After reading Mollie Hemmingway's book, I was inspired to write a book of my own. It's called the Kingmaker series. And a lot of what she says about unsupervised ballots and election interference figured into the plot, and the last of the three books is called Just Power. What's really remarkable about those who criticize election skeptics as, quote, election deniers who are a threat to democracy, is that the same people who are making these criticisms are the people who said we should have election season instead of election day. We should have unsupervised ballot boxes. All these things put downward pressure on the reliability of the election.
Now I'm a bit confused here. I look at the news media and I see on the left side, if you go to MSNBC, CNN, so on and so forth, they're constantly trying to deny that there was an issue with the election. And we all see that. We're saying that there was no problems. Believe us, it was fair. It was honest. It was all in the up and up. So why are you protesting so much? That's really like, why do you keep telling me that it's fair? There's an old phrase from Shakespeare. The lady doth protest too much, methinks. The more you protest, the more you say, I didn't do it, the more I'm going to believe that you did.
What we're discussing here is the question that they're not asking them about themselves. A lot of what they're doing puts downward pressure on the reliability of the election. Is an election season more or less reliable than an election day in deciding what is the will of the people for who should govern us? If we have an unsupervised ballot drop box, does that make the election more or less reliable?
She's not wrong, plain and simple. I look at the country, I look at the people, and we look at the government and we say, what happened? We believed in this country so much that almost 2 million people over the course, since the founding of this country, have given the ultimate sacrifice for this country. Because we believe in it. We are patriots. We know there's faults, but we still believe in our country. She's pointing out how we, the people, have so much distrust. So we've lost faith in what's supposed to be our leaders.
Instead of having election administration that is rigorously nonpartisan and impartial under the law, we have allowed the private takeover of government election offices by partisan oligarchs and their armies of activists who use those offices and their authorities to tilt the election toward favored candidates. Instead of voters being able to vote for the candidate of their choice, powerful interests backed by wealthy oligarchs are working to remove the most popular candidate and the ruling party's chief opponent from the ballot in a move reminiscent of Soviet Russia. And if that weren't enough, instead of the top candidates chosen by the people being able to fully engage in a vigorous campaign heading into an election, we have one side actively attempting to throw its opponent in prison and bankrupt his family. Again, reminiscent of Soviet Russia.
The best game for any politician to play is heads I win, tails you lose. But if a politician wins a game of heads I win, tails you lose, is it really something that makes him a winner?
Again, Mollie's not wrong. You know, we have certain inalienable rights in this country, and one of which is freedom of expression, is freedom of speech, freedom of thought, which the Soviet Union didn't really have. So she's pointing that out for a reason, because she's saying, do you not understand that the policies that you're making is taking those freedoms away? And by you taking those freedoms away, you're also taking away the trust we have in you.
After the 2016 election happened, people kept on saying about lock her up, about Hillary Clinton. And I do believe that Hillary Clinton was guilty of some serious crimes. But I always tell those people, if second prize in the presidential election is a stint in prison, that is going to destabilize our country very, very badly. Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon and started the civil war that brought down the Roman Republic because he was going to be prosecuted in Rome if he came back without his army. So instead of coming back without his army, he came back with his army.
Instead of a system of rule of law that gives Americans the same rights and due process, the Department of Justice and other partisan actors are prosecuting their opposition, whether powerful or lowly, and doing so in places where partisan juries will ensure a quick conviction. Instead of a free and independent press that shares news and information to help inform voters, we have a press that is almost exclusively the arm of one political party and is so corrupt that it is willing to perpetrate hoax after hoax against opposition party members. Instead of a vibrant public square where Americans can debate issues and express their strongly held views, we have an elaborate censorship industrial complex where the government works hand in hand with tech oligarchs to suppress and blacklist debate on all the important issues that contribute to election outcomes. This is something I know firsthand because our government worked with tech companies to censor me for my election reporting. Allowing just one of these attacks to infect our electoral system would be a crisis. Allowing all of them at the same time is an existential threat to our system of self-government. In my best-selling book on how election administration has been co-opted by groups seeking political power, I reported on a new phenomenon in the 2020 election that has already severely eroded trust and needs to be addressed decisively. In the last presidential election, nonprofit groups with very strong ties to the Democrat Party and funded by one of the world's wealthiest and most powerful men, Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg, took over government election offices, most notably in the Democrat areas of swing states. Since then, the efforts by partisans to further infiltrate government election offices to ensure favorable outcomes have only increased. I look forward to answering questions about how the private oligarch takeover of elections is a threat to our system of self-government.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for...
This is a message from me, Big Mike, as part of the common men, to you, Mollie Hemmingway. Thank you. It needed to be said by somebody. Somebody needed to tell these elitists, these intellectuals, these politicians, why we don't trust you. This is what it is. Here's the mirror in front of your face to see why we don't trust you. And the sad part is while we the people saw this, I don't know the elitists did. I don't think they did.
Instead of addressing any of the things that she said, the response from the ruling party is to double down on it. For example, Georgia changed its election laws, and the election law changes didn't favor the Democrats. They said, for example, that organizations trying to get out the vote and trying to do electioneering couldn't go on to the lines where elections were happening and hand out gifts such as water or whatever. And the politicians had a completely different story about what the election law said. They said that you're not allowed to hand somebody who's online to vote any water. And that's not the truth.
It's sick. Deciding in some states that you cannot bring water to people standing in line, waiting to vote.
All it takes to know that they were lying is to look at the law, which is not a very long law. Instead, they double down on the lies. Joe Biden, in response to the law, said that it makes Jim Crow look like Jim Eagle.
This makes Jim Crow look like Jim Eagle.
Now, I'm not exactly sure what Mr. Word Salad really meant by that, but he seems to be saying that this law, which was passed by the people of Georgia, is tremendously racist, and that's absolutely absurd.
Mollie Hemmingway is pointing out how we don't trust the elites anymore. We don't trust the media. We don't trust the politicians. We just don't. And she goes list by inch, step by step on why we don't trust you. And she, there's stuff about like our president when he was in Congress, how he was a segregationist. It wasn't like a question even. It was fact. But now you look at Google, it's hard to find those same articles that 10 years ago was easy to find. Why? Because they want to put forth an agenda. And we see this. We know this. So we trust you less.
Instead of addressing these issues, as I said, they're doubling down. One tactic that they use is calling people who are skeptical of the election deniers. And Wikipedia here talks about the election denial movement in the United States.
It's a widespread conservative belief that any election not resulting in a desired Republican victory has been rigged and stolen through voter fraud.
They list elections where what they call election denial has happened. But the most famous case where a party disputed the outcome of an election was in the year 2000. And that's not listed here. They list 2012, 2016, 2020, and 2024, but they don't say a single thing about the 2004 elections, where the Democrats had a lot to say about their belief in the election, and what they had to say wasn't any good. And remember, Joe Biden recently denied the outcome of the recent Virginia gubernatorial race.
Hello, Virginia. And the real governor, Terry McAuliffe.
Let's go back to 2000 again. We had the hanging Chad, and we had this election that was so much, where there were so many issues. So what did Florida do? Florida cleaned up its election laws to make it fair and just, and to make it so that it's better than what we had. There's always room for improvement, but they cleaned it up.
If you look at any video that discusses the 2020 presidential election, here's what you're going to find. You're going to find a little fact check here saying that the election was on the up and up. Now, whether the election was on the up and up or not isn't really what I want to talk about here. What I want to talk about is how they are insisting that it's on the up and up. Instead of saying, hey, listen, what we're going to do is we're going to make it so that no matter who's looking at the election, they're going to say it's fair. Instead of saying any of those things, they just insist, oh no, the election we won, it was completely on the up and up, and anyone who says differently, it's a conservative conspiracy theory.
Who are the fact checkers? What are they really trying to push forward? Because when I look at the fact checkers, when I see these fact checkers, any article that I put out that questions the narrative got checked. This article appears to be false, or this article may have some false information, or this article shouldn't be believed, or it was hidden. They would hide it the way you had to press that button to see it, or they just take it down. And it was like, we don't want this to be told out to the world. Why? What is the purpose of that? Well, guess what? The purpose is, we want you to believe what we want you to believe. But now here's the problem. When you don't allow opposing thoughts out there, you're not going to be believed either, because you can't defend your point.
So after 9/11, they asked that question, why do they hate us? And they weren't asking that question to get an answer. They were asking that question to say, if you keep on being the way you are, we're going to keep on deserving it. They asked that question so they can have a club to beat we the people over the head with. You should be better. You should be more like us, who don't want you to use oil, who don't want you to have this attitude or whatever. No. But now, when the mirror can turn to them, when they can say, hey, now we're the ones not being believed. We the elites, we the intellectuals, we the government leaders, the politicians, the people don't believe us anymore. And instead of asking, why don't they believe us? They shake their fingers at us and say, oh, it's denial.
There's an old adage that says, trust is earned, not given. You want my trust. You want me to believe in what you're saying? Earn it. Show me that you can be trusted again. Until that point, it's just not going to happen.